All right, guys, so we are back and finishing off kind of this ancient Africa type stuff and getting into some empires, Nubia, Kush, and the Bantu. The Nubia area that we're going to be talking about, this is basically the area that is, south of some of the lower cataracts into the Sudan type area. And understanding that there were some groups that were out there that weren't all Egypt. And the first group that I want to talk about is within Nubia itself. Nubia is the area to the south of the fourth or the fifth cataract, really depending on who you ask. And they were clearly around and organized for a long time. The problem that we have is they don't necessarily have writing. The Europeans call them the Tasseti, and they're mentioned as early as 2300 BCE on a trade mission. So it's not like, hey, we found people. They clearly are a developed civilization. They clearly have goods. They have some type of economic system. We just don't know a lot about them. We do know that they were in city-states, and we know city-states kind of prevent you from creating an empire. We do get some references to their religion. I have their Apademak, who the lion god of war, and Sebumukar, their creator god. So kind of in the same, this polytheistic group going on. Lots of trade. We know they were very active in the Red Sea, spawning over to the Arabian Peninsula and places like modern-day Yemen and Oman and stuff like that. And we definitely know they had social societies or social distinctions. Why? We look at their tombs, guys, and we've said this repeatedly. When you see really fancy tombs and not so fancy tombs and dudes that are just kind of buried, we clearly understand that there is some type of social class going on, as well as hints to professions that we would see, skilled craftsmen, merchants, stuff like that. Now, the first major empire, however, that we do see develop kind of in the southern portion of this area is Kerma. Kerma, I have 2800 to 1500 BCE, and you're like, wait, Mr. Lin, we have a reference to them in 2300 BC. Yeah, but that could be more recent. Not real hard and fast on these ones here, guys. They are named after their original city, that being Kerma. Okay. At one point, we know they go to war with the Egyptians. At one point, we know from some references from the Egyptians that they almost conquer them, that they fight them. We have some evidence that some of their leaders married into the leadership and became possible dynastic heads in the 12th or the 13th dynasties. We're not 100% sure. Okay, and if you look at the mouse over here, here's our friends in Kerma. Okay. But we know we have some pretty significant building. This is what's left, some type of palace structure over here. We see the foundations of a large city, and with the open areas, so clearly there's definitely some city planning going on here. Okay, and we have found some artwork. Here's a water buffalo over here. These are some artwork on walls. Okay. So we possibly see them. These are that 12th, 13th dynasty. So, we don't know a lot about them, but clearly they were there and clearly they had influence on Egypt. And here's some more artwork that we have found. These toy soldiers and necklaces and pottery and wall art. I mean, this is the hallmark of a very advanced civilization that has a lot of economic power as well. But probably the biggest one was the Empire of Kush, also known as Meroe. Meroe was their main city, so we hear some people call them Kushites, some people call them the people of Meroe. It's basically the same thing, and they last for quite a long time, 1750 to about the 1st century BCE. One of their other main areas was Napata. They were primarily along the Blue Nile, and at one point they indeed conquer Upper Egypt. They actually control a good half of Egypt, near the tail end of the New Kingdom into kind of that intermediary period at the end there. They built pyramids, and we know that there's a lot of exchange between the two groups. So as much as they were able to conquer much of Egypt and actually rule all of it under the 25th dynasty under King Pi, the Kushites definitely adopted a lot of things from the Egyptians. We've got pyramids. We know that they worshipped Isis and Amun. They do form their alphabet off of the Egyptian alphabet. And they are a power in this area for quite a long time. They control a lot of the trade routes coming out of the Red Sea, and that's going to be crucial for trade as we start to talk about. Unfortunately for the Kushites, as they got bigger, they ran headlong into the Romans, and they ran headlong into the Romans at their height. Starting in the 1st century BCE, with guys like Caesar and stuff like that, and then of course then expanding into Octavian and those later on. And when you run into the Romans at that time, you just don't win ever. And here we can see the area that they mainly control for most of it. Again, they start to work their way up later on, but then again, if you look at the mouse up here, the Egyptians will push down. But this area is really rich. They have access again to the Red Sea. They have access to trade that comes out of the Sahara. We'll be talking about that later. Really, really centrally located and strong area for an empire. And here's some examples of their pyramid building here. Okay, not as grand as the other ones, but these are tombs of kings as well. And you see here, this of course once supported a temple structure, and you can see this great artwork. Okay, it looks like guy's got like a ram's head thing going on here. Very, very sophisticated stuff. Okay, these are actually some sphinxes. So we see the European influence, and we look at all of the different pyramids for this sacred burial ground. Now, Sub-Sahara or Sub-Saharan Africa. This is going to be a little different. So now we're going to go primarily in Western Africa as well as Southern Africa. So the Egyptians and all them, that's North Africa and living within the desert. And Sub-Saharan Africa is going to be very, very different. The people here, we refer to them as the Bantu. Do we know what they called themselves? Not really. We don't have any writing. And even some of these groups today, we don't have their writing either. They primarily, from archaeological records, we believe they started around the Niger and Congo rivers in modern-day Nigeria and Cameroon. And by about 4000 BCE, we have a variety of different languages. The key thing being Bantu, and Bantu is going to be the basis of this. Guys, this is going to be no different than the Indo-European stuff that we talked about, using language to link groups. And that's why you see kind of the two distinctive groups. You have the Saharan Africans and the Sub-Saharan Africans. And then modern day, we have over 500 languages that have descended from the Bantu in Sub-Saharan Africa. They are going to migrate all over Southern Africa. And the key thing here, yams, millet, sorghum, and palms. These are really important crops. They're crops that can be sustained by a lot of people. They are crops that are able to deal with blight. They are crops that don't necessarily need tons and tons of water. And yams actually will be the agricultural basis for a lot of societies in this area. So these are important crops to understand. They live in small village groups, and many of them do live like that today. I don't even want to go as far as to even say city-states. It's really even smaller than that, smaller tribal groupings. Now, in Sub-Saharan Africa, will we get some empires later on? Absolutely. In the Kingdom of the Congo, you'll get the Swahili city-states, you'll get Great Zimbabwe, and we'll be talking about these later on. But for much of their history, it's relatively smaller groups. And because it was, relatively smaller groups, and a lot of the agricultural was just, sustainable agriculture just to, allow people to live. We don't have a lot of writing. Again, as I said, many of these languages have not been written today. They're very hard to understand. But in Sub-Saharan Africa, that's basically how it will develop. And we'll be talking about that, as we move forward. This is the basin that we're talking about here. Okay, so if you look at the mouse, Nigeria, Cameroon, okay, that is our area of Bantu development. Okay, so we think they started here, and then you have the basic different migrations. Okay, Congo, that's going to be a state that develops as well as Zimbabwe. All right, so you can see slowly but surely. Note Madagascar is left off here. That's going to be very, very important because Madagascar is going to get occupied from the opposite direction in one of the more impressive things that I've ever seen in ancient history. And you can see why you wouldn't want to live here. Here's the Congo River where many would grow up at. Here's the Niger River. I mean, these are areas really that have a lot of water, a lot of opportunity to grow crops and stuff like that. Okay, now what's interesting enough with these guys is they actually had iron first. Many hundreds of years before the Hyksos bring it in Egypt. And one of the big things that they did with it is they were able to build huge dugout canoes, which I'll show you a picture of in a little bit. Lots and lots of trade back and forth. And you could even maybe argue that these guys were more effective and more widespread traders than the Egyptians because, you know, each area, if I pop back a little bit, actually, so if you look, this is a huge area. I mean, you could fit, this is bigger than all of the United States, just to give you an idea of how large Africa is. Okay, and so, you know, the group that lives here has different stuff than the group that lives over here, then over here, then over here, then over here, and so you get these constant routes that are going back and forth for trade. And like I said, arguably more complex and larger than the Egyptian trade. We do know that most of it was tribal life, and we see a lot of it today. We typically have some type of chief, lots of elaborate initiation rites that we'll talk about today, either killing lions or some type of, like, you know, physical activity that you have to do to survive. You know, you'll kind of see that reflected a little bit later on when we talk about Spartan initiations. And many of these still exist today. Most of us call it barbaric, but in many cases, I don't think that it is. It's the idea of unifying a tribe that everybody has gone through these same things. But because of this tribal life, that's why if you go into sub-Saharan Africa, you have so many different ethnicities, you have so many different tribal groups, that has led to some problems that we'll talk about. Here's an example of a dugout canoe. Okay, very effective. And again, something, we talk about this with Egypt, what we don't know is why they never tried to sail out. Both in sub-Saharan Africa and in Latin America, they never make ocean-going vessels. I wish I could tell you why. I just don't know. Maybe because they were so focused on life within the rivers and the forests. You know, these canoes, some of which, these canoes are 6,000 years old, that, you know, they could provide everything they needed, so why go out? Yes, they did some offshore fishing and stuff, but we are not going out of the sight of land. Okay, and I wish I could tell you why. And here's some just beautiful artwork that we can see from the Bantu here, and as well as these fancy shields and stuff like that. And so understanding, again, that all of this is not just Egypt, that there was a lot going on, and as we move forward, we're going to talk about these guys a lot more, okay? So make sure you have your notes and questions and stuff, and we'll get to this in class. See you soon, guys.